So, Nathan, let's start with you in regards to the recruiting class. And we touched on it a number of times, and it was locked in and sealed all but one pretty much during that December time period. But you got a running back signee there, Logan Diggs, 3-star from Louisiana, 28th rated player at his position, according to 247 Sports. How does he fit into the mix? Do you think here in 2021, does he fit into the mix? And your overall impression of the recruiting class?
Yeah, I mean, I think he does. I think there's definitely a possibility that he can be your third back in 2021. And I think he has the capability of, maybe being more than that if, there's some injuries or something like that happen. Obviously Nick knows this as well, but, Kyron Williams and Chris Tyree coming back probably solidify the top two guys as long as they're healthy. But no, Logan Diggs, I think, is a pretty underrated recruit overall, and he certainly has the size and just some of the different characteristics that are needed for a freshman running back to do pretty well at the college level.
Nick, anything in particular before we bring in James on whether it be Logan Diggs or your thoughts about the recruiting class overall, or any particular standouts to you?
Just the interesting part of it being the unique recruiting year that it was. This looked like it was going to be, Brian Kelly had mentioned over a year ago at the Camping World Bowl, saying that they were going to make every effort, fight for every inch in order to make this a top 5 class. And when COVID hit, when the restrictions in terms of recruiting and visits hit, this thing looked like it was falling off of a cliff. And they still put it together, salvaged it. It didn't end up being a top 5 class. I think a lot of people kind of freaked out when running back Will Shipley ended up taking Clemson over Notre Dame and thought, what the heck are they going to do with this position? What are you going to do? You're not going to get that playmaker. And you bring in, okay, maybe not rated as highly as Shipley, but you brought in 2 guys at the running back position. And I think the talent in that room, you already have Kyron Williams, Chris Tyree a year ago coming in. I think the talent at that position in terms of depth is significantly improved compared to where it's been in, years and years and years for Notre Dame.
I love the recruiting class. I mean, yeah, I think what Nick was saying earlier, it looked like it was going off the ship, but then there's a lot of depth in here. I think I'm more worried about the quantity of what we're getting in than rather just the entire quality. I would get 12 4-stars and then 2 5-stars and 3 3-stars or something like that. I just think this is a great class.
You're in this middle ground of here are the elite, and then here's everybody else in college football. You're on this second tier, and the reasonable fan has to be happy with Brian Kelly. There's no question this is a better football program than it was in 2016, even in 2012, in reaching a BCS championship game. But everybody wants to win the whole thing, of course. And there just seems to be a decided gap that still just persists, Nick.
Yeah, I think that there's the haves and the have-nots when you look at this. And, the list of haves right now is incredibly limited when it comes to college football. You have Alabama and Clemson. Then you have a gap, and it's pretty much Ohio State's there. LSU's there. Okay, there's your national champions. In
Georgia, too.
Years. In Georgia, yeah. Georgia's knocking on the door. They've gone to a title game and came within an overtime stop of being there. Otherwise, who else is on that list that might be ahead of where Notre Dame is here the last 4 years or so? You look at it, and it's really Oklahoma has a couple of Heisman Trophy winners in that time from college football playoff appearances. Same thing happens when they go to the CFP, though. It's not exactly close games that they're losing to Clemson, that they're losing to Alabama in those. Notre Dame's knocking on the door, and yes, there's always going to be that thought of, yep, they got to return to the glory days of the Lou Holtz era, Eric Barzunian era of winning a national championship every few years or being at least in the top 2, top 3 every year seemingly, and Brian Kelly has it close to that part of it, but he doesn't have him winning the national title yet. And so until he does, it's going to be frustration and anger for a large part of Notre Dame fans that I think they'll look at it and have that expectation of winning a title. However, there's a few and far between of teams that can realistically go into a year with that expectation right now in college football. And that's more of a college football problem, I think, than an actual Notre Dame problem.
Yeah, I think honestly one of the things I'm looking forward to the most is the QB positional battle. Because I really think it's going to come down between Cone and probably Drew Pine, even though I really want to see Buckner. But I really think Buckner is – I think it was talked about before that he probably should be a 5-star recruit but didn't have enough playing time, especially when there was no – think there's no high school football in California this year. So I think it'd be interesting to redshirt him, and maybe he'd be the guy who is the next Ian Book or Brady Quinn, whoever you want to say.
Yeah, the thing interesting about him is just kind of, I think Notre Dame fans that have seen the name or heard the name, but not seen the film necessarily. Sure, great, completely athletic kid. I think that they're going to take a little bit of an adjustment period with the throwing motion that he has. Just kind of compared to what you're used to with the, not that he's a typical drop back passer, he's got more athleticism, can be a dual threat, but he kind of has like that almost like Phillip Rivers kind of short arm, kind of hitching the giddy up, for lack of a better term, of what it has. I'm interested to see it too. I think that it's pretty, I don't want to say safe. Anything can obviously happen. Injuries happen, college football, in this COVID world we live in. Everything seemingly has been happening here for the last year or so. But I kind of looking at the position, it sure as heck feels to me like it's going to be Jack Cohen's, and that's why he was brought in, kind of bridge the gap so this rebuild year in between quarterbacks doesn't turn out to be like 1994 was for older Notre Dame fans, or like 2007 was when Jimmy Clausen was the incoming big guy as the freshman in that disastrous season there. I think that Cohen kind of, whether it kicks the can down the road of not having experience at the position, but I think that it does kind of prevent you from the bottom being really bottoming out like we've seen here a couple times in the last 20, 25 years or so with Notre Dame anyway.
Hitting on Buckner a little bit here, and I know James kind of mentioned this, after his junior season where he broke pretty much every California and maybe even some high school records there was at the quarterback position. I think he had like 81 total touchdowns. He had over like 1,500 yards rushing, over 4,500 yards passing, and he did kind of elevate to that 5-star status. And James kind of mentioned this again. California didn't have high school football this year, struggled a little bit at some of the camps he went to, in the summer and spring, and stuff like that, and that kind of dropped him into like that. Maybe like I think he finished, at least on the composite rating, at 24/7 Sports, around 90 or so. But I think it's pretty clear, and if you ask the people in the industry, that really follow this, even more so than us three do, the talent's there for him to be like a top 10 or top 20 kid in this class, and he just, he needs a little seasoning. I think that's kind of the reason why Notre Dame brought in Jack Cohen. Obviously Brendan Clark, who's there as well. He's had a knee injury that he's been dealing with since his high school days. And so that was another reason behind it. Drew Pine, maybe a little short of stature, and is going to remind some people of maybe Ian Book light without the legs. So you're really looking at probably Buckner taking this job over, hopefully in 2022, and then Cohen getting the job done for Notre Dame in 2021, and kind of continuing the pattern of pretty solid quarterback play.
Guys, we've got John Sirian on the live chat asking about instant impact from this 21 class this fall.
I think if there's one that sticks out to me, I know Nathan and I talked about this briefly recently on the Notre Dame podcast, to be named. We got to get around to making a name on that. We'll do it one of these days. Bigger fish to fry. I got this kid yelling at me to my left. This 14 months old wants more apples. But when I look at it, I think it's Rocco Spinner, the right guard, or possibly a right guard for Notre Dame, just because he is one of the best offensive lineman recruits, especially interior offensive linemen, that there was in the country. And you just kind of compare it to where Notre Dame has holes coming up this year, and you're replacing so much of that offensive line that I think that presents an opportunity there for itself. And maybe he's not as highly regarded a recruit even on the offensive line like Blake Fisher is, but I think the ability or the possibility for him to be an instant impact type of guy is significant, just based on kind of need and where there's openings on this roster. Don't know about you guys.